All right, hoping to wrap this up here in one more video. So what we're looking at here is a performance piece by Yoko Ono, who was part of a group called Fluxus. Fluxus was interested in kind of breaking down the barriers between visual arts, music, theater, looking for new formats for art making after World War II. And what happens in Cut Piece is Yoko Ono sits on the stage, fully dressed, with the scissors at her side. She remains emotionless, reactionless, as different members of the audience, kind of at their own will, come up and cut pieces of her clothing. And this kind of involving the audience, kind of social experiment to see how far people will go. This is part of transforming the passive audience into active performers in performance art. And it says a lot about, the kind of power of posing. We talk about to strike a pose or to pose a threat. But there's also a level of surrender here. Ono is surrendering to the audience through her performance. And this is, when you watch the video, I will say this could be triggering. It is definitely, you can definitely see parts where she's fighting back tears, where she is feeling scared and nervous. But I think that this is exactly the power of using the artist's own body as an artwork to comment on things like gender dynamics in society, to comment on Yoko Ono here as an Asian woman and the kind of preconceived notions that brings as well. Feminist artists also begin to kind of turn things around too in terms of our preconceived notions. And here we see Sylvia Sleigh's painting called The Turkish Bath from 1973. Now this is a kind of play on an earlier 19th century European painting called The Turkish Bath. A French artist named Ingres goes to the Ottoman Empire. He goes to the East, and he is fascinated by all of these women luxuriating in the bath, all in the kind of uninhibited by their nudity, versus the kind of extreme prudery of Victorian Europe. And so we see all of these kind of sexualized, eroticized women in Ingres' painting. But Sleigh is turning this on its head by saying, we have all these female nudes in the history of European painting. What if we make all those figures men? And it's a great example of role reversal where men are being objectified just as women have traditionally been, and it challenges our gaze. We often assume that the gaze is male on a female nude, but here it's a little bit more disjarring. It makes us realize the kind of gender imbalance in gazing in art. Similarly, James Luna is thinking about the body as a way to challenge our images of not just notions of gender, but also notions of race and ethnicity. This is a 1987 performance piece by the Native American artist James Luna, who wanted to challenge the way contemporary American culture and museums have presented his race, Indigenous Americans, as essentially extinct and vanished. And so this is another example of a performance piece where Luna installs himself, his body, in an exhibition case in the San Diego Museum of Man, in a section on the Kumeyaay Indians who once inhabited San Diego County. And in doing so, he critiques the representation of First Nations, of Native cultures by museums and other institutions that systematically objectify and romanticize Native peoples as either living in the past, having a culture that hasn't modernized or evolved, or that has simply vanished altogether. All around Luna were other exhibitions with mannequins and props showing this supposed long-lost Kumeyaay way of life. And so here's Luna, who puts himself in the middle of the exhibition, a living, breathing person, and we see all these little labels on the wall and in the exhibition table himself that that point out scars on his body, that were suffered when drunk or when fighting. He puts some of his personal items in the glass case, including contemporary ritual objects that he has used in his own community. He also puts up in other display cases recordings by Jimi Hendrix, political buttons, college diplomas, divorce papers, any sort of other modern cultural artifacts to remind people that indigenous cultures are living and developing. And in a 2008 interview, Luna explained, I had long looked at representation of our peoples in museums, and they all dwelled in the past. They were one-sided. We were simply objects among bones, and bones among objects, and then signed and sealed with a date. And so he wants to change that kind of presentation. Shirin Neshat's work uses photography, and she is an Iranian-American contemporary artist. Like Frida Kahlo, her work often deals with this feeling of being caught between different cultures. And here we see a series of photographs called The Women of Allah that explores the ideology of Iranian women who are caught up in religious zealotry, wearing here this kind of head-to-toe body covering called a chador that was introduced into Iranian culture after the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. Before that, when Neshat was growing up in Iran, she wore makeup, miniskirts, modern fashion. And so the chador is something that's very foreign to her. She layers calligraphy on the bit of exposed skin of these women in Farsi, which is the modern Persian language. And we see that, of course, that kind of Persian, Farsi calligraphy looks strange, looks a little bit perhaps mysterious to a Western audience, and we might think that it's an extreme religious text. But instead, this is, these texts here are poems that offer different views for and against the value of wearing the chador. And so we see, and oftentimes Muslim women are depicted as subservient and passive in Western culture, and here we see these women depicted with guns as well. And so I think whatever kind of images these conjure up here, this work really requires a kind of deeper interaction from us. We need to really think about our own preconceived notions, and we really need to unpack a lot of ideas in order to understand something like Neshat's series called The Women of Allah. All right, the final work we're going to look at is by Kara Walker. And here, Walker takes over a former sugar factory in Brooklyn, and one of your assigned readings for this week is actually a short video about Kara Walker's subtlety sculpture. You should be watching that in its entirety, taking good notes, because I'm just going to go over it very briefly. There's a lot of things that are at play here, because Walker conflates sugar, slavery, and the sexual objectification of Black women into one artwork. In fact, an art historian, Kimberly Pinder, says that The reality of a nation of immigrants, this is the United States, the legacy of slavery, and the genocide of native populations prevents issues of race and difference from being resolved in the U.S. And Kara Walker is a contemporary African-American artist who does not abandon race in her work, but also does not want her work to be reduced to simply Black art. Instead, she creates projects that are informed but not determined by race. Informed but not determined. And again, I encourage you to watch the video to understand how she connects the history of sugar and slavery. Those two concepts are inextricably intertwined with the sexual objectification of Black women that continues in our present culture. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. And this is all of the content for week 11.